Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a deep dive into the 6 companies Palantir has acquired over the course of the past 2 decades. Now, Palantir is one of those companies that doesn't really acquire. In fact, CEO Alex Karp has been pretty adamant about the fact that if you're an innovative product-driven company, you don't need to acquire. It's kind of inorganic to grow if you have to acquire companies to then be able to mix them into your culture and try to get them to up to speed with everything you do versus just build it yourself. And if you're truly product-driven, truly innovative, and still nimble enough to figure things out, you don't need to go acquire companies. Palantir has about $3 billion of cash on their balance sheet, and they have not made any acquisitions since they have gone public. And I think that's actually a good thing because hopefully they're figuring out how to deploy that $3 billion in a more meaningful way than just acquire a company. Given if you have the best technologists in the world working at your company, you should be able to figure things out and not have to acquire a company unless you're acquiring that company's clients or it's more sales business driven. So outside of that, I wanted to then go and do a little bit more of a deep dive on what the companies are that Palantir did buy over the course of the past 2 decades that were relevant enough for them to buy. So these are the 6 names. Silk was acquired by Palantir Technologies on August 10th, 2016. That was the most recent one. VoiceGem was acquired February 2013. Kimono Labs was acquired February 2016. Poptip was acquired July 2014. FT Technologies was acquired February 2015. And then a final company called Propeller was acquired in 2014. So those were the list of the 6 different technology companies that Palantir bought. And I want to go through all of them. So let's go through the first one. Palantir acquires social polling startup Poptip. I want to kind of go through these articles and then discuss why I think they bought it and if those acquisitions had any relevance. Sometimes when you acquire a company, after a couple months, you realize there was no point of buying the company. That's just kind of how the corporate world works. But sometimes there actually is a meaningful necessity to buy them. So Poptip, a startup that helps companies conduct social media surveys and analyze online conversations, just announced that his team will be joining Palantir Technologies starting August 1st. Palantir spokesman confirmed the acquisition but declined to comment. These 2 companies don't seem like an obvious fit. For example, seeing the slightly mystified conversation that follows this tweet. As I said, Poptip is a social marketing polling company, while Palantir is a data analysis company that sells this technology to governmental agencies and financial institutions. However, what Poptip does seem to offer to Palantir is experience in data analysis. Poptip founder Kelsey Father wrote on the company blog, "The Poptip team has worked tirelessly to develop innovative technology that helps commercial companies process unstructured conversation data." Already you see the kind of the correlation, the symbiotic relationship between data that's unstructured and then all the technology Palantir has to try to be able to learn how to structure better data. And we've been fortunate enough to help quantify the voices of hundreds of millions of people through our products. Our work at Poptip was our first foray in real-time data analysis, but we know we still have so much room to innovate and grow, and Palantir gives us the resources to do just that. So overall, that one made sense. I mean, I don't know too much about Poptip. It was more in the social space around companies trying to understand different polls and insights into their audiences. A little bit more of a marketing company, which Palantir doesn't really engage with too much, right? They don't really care about ads and monetization and stuff like that. But the core technology that was being used to be able to understand how to structure a ton of conversational data, which now, with GPT and all this stuff, it's gotten so advanced than it was in 2014. You could imagine there was some value there, and that's why Palantir acquired them. All right, let's go to the next one. Palantir acquires Kimono Labs for its web scraping service. Kimono Labs, a Y Combinator-backed web scraping tool that helps developers grab information from sites without having to write their own scrapers, has been acquired by Palantir. The company made the announcement on its website today, and Kimono co-founder Poptip confirmed the acquisition. Neither Palantir nor Kimono disclosed any financial deals, but Kimono previously raised about $5 million in 2014, so it was obviously acquired for more than $5 million. Kimono Labs says it currently has 125,000 developers on its platform. They will only have 2 weeks to migrate to a different service because the team will shut down the service on February 2016. Because of our new roles at Palantir, it will not be possible for us to continue providing the publicly available cloud-hosted Kimono product, the team explains. I asked Renaid for more details about why the team decided on shutting down the service on such short notice, but he declined to comment. Kimono will still offer users access to a free desktop version of the service for OS X and Windows. The company says that this pretty much offers the same functionality as the hosted version, and that it will integrate the desktop app with Firebase to offer cloud-hosted API endpoints. With Scrappy, Feedity, and others, there are already a couple of other alternative frameworks. Palantir often shuts down the companies it acquires, so today's move doesn't come as a surprise, but this is obviously not an ideal situation for developers who integrated Kimono services into their applications. So Kimono, the way I understand them, is a web scraping service, and essentially they allow developers, that's why they had 125,000 developers on their website, to get information from sites without having to write their own scrapers. What a scraper is, to to the best of my knowledge, from what I understand, is essentially a tool that allows you to get all the information you need from a different website. So for example, if you're scraping the RSS feed of CNN, that means every single article that CNN posts is updated within a decentralized RSS feed that you could theoretically scrape, and then you could have that on your news building app. For example, if you're aggregating a algorithmic feed of news updates and you have CNN and Fox and MSNBC and all these different companies, you can just scrape their RSS feeds from their websites, and then all that content comes into one place. And then, they probably don't care, because if you find another way to drive them traffic, that's all they care about. But you probably care because you want to aggregate all that content in one place. And that would be the benefit of using a web scraping tool like that. Why would Palantir acquire a company like this? The only way I can imagine why they do it is not because they're interested in web scraping websites, but the technology that Kimono probably created to be able to web scrape without having to build your own application to do the web scraping means it was agnostic to whatever API you were using. It was probably exciting to them in terms of what they could do to be able to, because essentially web scraping is just data, right? You're just taking a bunch of data from a bunch of different places and you're organizing it. So it's not sort of like data analytics, but it is a tool that you could argue Palantir, with its like trillions of patents, could have seen some value in. And they were like, well, instead of just doing this and that, let's just acquire it, incorporate it into what we're doing, and then keep going from there. So that could have been one of the reasons why Palantir was interested in a web scraping service, to help better structure their own ideas around data. Next one, August 10th, 2016, Palantir acquires data visualization startup Silk. So at least data visualization, immediately you're like, all right, this kind of probably is going to make sense. Silk's co-founder and CEO announced today that the private data analytics unicorn Palantir would be acquiring the company. The transaction appears to be an acqui-hire, which means they acquire the company, but they hire all the members from the company, with members of the Silk team directly joining Palantir in new roles. Founded in 2010, Silk helps data journalists, activists, NGOs, and businesses produce data visualizations in the cloud without the need for complex software and programming knowledge. Silk.co as a platform will continue to operate. Nothing will change to current Silks, and you can still create a new Silk for free. The Silk team noted that it was willing to transition to work on even bigger and more important data problems. Interesting. Signaling that the deal is likely not indicative of any consumer pivot for Palantir. So there was this is a consumer product, but Palantir obviously did not acquire it for a consumer use case. The $20 billion Palantir produces data analytics solutions for the U.S. government to aid in counterterrorism, as well as platform for the financial services industry to support fraud detection. Silk raised 3 small incremental rounds of financing, totaled $3.6 million from NEA. Wow, that's not a lot. From 2011 to 2013, just $3 million, and they were able to do a decent amount. As a result of today's announced transaction, there won't be anyone left to operate the Silk platform. Silk.co will still operate as is and will no longer be able to provide technical support. And then it says we have reached out for comments and we'll update it when we get them. This makes sense. So data visualization in the context of journalists, NGOs, governmental organizations, consumer enterprises trying to be able to understand what their data looks like without having to have an entire cloud built just for that data is probably relevant to Palantir at the time in 2016 for seeing how they could offer some. Remember, 2016 was when they were trying to build commercial platforms. Like Foundry was just commercializing back then. That's when they were getting Coca-Cola and Home Depot and American Express and all these big ass clients to use them. And then they lost all those clients because the product sucked, right? So Foundry was not as good as it was back then. By 2018, 2019, it started scaling, and like they were in hyperscale mode where it got really better, 700, 800 million in revenue by 2019, 2020. So things got a lot better for Palantir. But for the first, 3-4 years, it wasn't that easy for them to be able to sell to the enterprise. So I would imagine they were like, all right, this is some version of data visualization for a particular type of content that we are probably not the best at. If we could acquire this company and we could get their team to work on bigger and better problems, which is what the CEO is saying, stuff that actually is more meaningful in the world other than just viewing your content, then there's probably a broader use case for why Palantir acquired Silk and why data visualization made sense for them to acquire at that moment. All right, next one. Palantir acquires a team behind the YC voice email startup VoiceGem. This was February 2013. Palantir just scooped up some fresh minds to aid in its mission of analyzing the world's information. Today, Y Combinator summer 2012 startup VoiceGem announced its team is joining Palantir and it will shut down its voice email service in mid-March. VoiceGem had delivered over 1 million seconds of voice recordings, but now its makers are moving on to a team that's truly changing the world. So even back then, they thought, Palantir's mission was so exciting, which really hasn't changed over the past 10 years. Now, voicemails aren't a thing anymore, from what I understand. If this was a voicemail company, no one No one uses voicemails anymore, primarily, but it says voice emails. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. Adra Cara and Alexander Blessing came up with the idea for voice gen while working on computer science master's degrees at Stanford. They wanted to intimately communicate with their families in Turkey and Germany, but the time difference made phone calls tough. So they built a simple website and app where you could enter an email address, record a voice message, and have voice gen send the recipient a link to a web-hosted audio message. Essentially, iMessage today with like audio, or Twitter DMs with audio. It's a problem that's like Facebook, you could do this. It's a problem that's Instagram, it's a problem that's so not even real anymore because the big tech platforms have incorporated this into their apps. But at the time in 2012, I guess there wasn't a way to easily do this. The product got some traction with senior citizens who aren't as familiar with typing as they are old-fashioned talking. Then VoiceGem writes, it became the alternative to a phone call for thousands of people of all ages. Wow. Folks ranging from families to language students, aspiring singers to podcasters, and universities to businesses. So there was a use case for this product, and that's what the UI looks like right there. But as Hacker News commentator Aaron Beth Rose points out, 1 million seconds of audio recordings cut up into 30-second average voice messages meant VoiceGen was averaging only 138 recordings per day over its 6-month lifespan. That might not have been promising enough to push forward as a full-fledged business, and VoiceGen never announced that it had raised any additional funding beyond YC. The voice messaging space has also seen some new competitors, so they're going to talk about it. Oh, I remember Voxer, bro. I remember that company. I remember actually talking to a girl in 2012. That makes so much sense on Voxer. Wow, I didn't know they raised $30 million. Yeah, I remember using Voxer. Wow, that just brought back some memories. So you could argue there probably wasn't that much there was a lot of competition. Private companies and governments transmit enormous amounts of audio but don't do much to make sense of it. Palantir's purpose is to radically change how groups analyze information, so it has to know how to crunch voice data. We're awaiting comment from the VoiceGem and Palantir teams, but we bet the startups team will be helping Palantir turn audio into insight. Wow, so that makes sense. So that was kind of the reason Palantir wanted to acquire them. Obviously, their whole argument is how can we understand data information in a much more unique perspective. Audio is something that Palantir probably had not experimented with, and there's a lot of audio in the government and in commercial enterprises, so it kind of makes sense to be able to see how can you crunch audio to be able to get insight. We do know that VoiceGem's team will be leaving its Palo Alto headquarters, moving to Palantir's New York offices. The acqui-hire is another example of how top-tier accelerators are becoming talent feeders for big tech companies. All right, yeah, that makes sense. I guess there was a argument for Palantir to be able to understand audio and data a little bit better by acquiring VoiceGem. Next one, Anthony Ha. Palantir acquires app-making startup Propeller. Okay, let's get into this one. In its second announced deal this week, Palantir Technologies has acquired Propeller, a startup offering tools for building native mobile apps. 2 acquisitions in 1 week seems pretty ambitious for any company, but as noted in Fortune, it's particularly unusual for Palantir, a data analyst company that has only made one other acquisition, VoiceGem, the one we just talked about last week. Last year, Propeller raised $1.25 million from Andreessen Horowitz, and in the words of my boss, Alexia, says, everyone good, basically. One big connection with Palantir. Peter Thiel is both a co-founder of Palantir and a partner at Founders Fund. FF Angel is the feed's seed investment arm. So this is a Peter Thiel investment that ended up becoming a Palantir acquisition. There's not that many details, but they said, we have great respect for the people and work accomplished at Palantir, and getting to know them over the past few months made it clear just how well our teams are aligned. Having tackled many technical challenges facing mobile app creation, we're eager to solve important problems at Palantir at a global scale. One of the reasons I think they acquired this company is not because Palantir wants to be like some app store for social apps, which is what it seems like Propeller kind of was in terms of helping people, build native mobile apps, but rather Palantir's Foundry is essentially a platform where you can build an application on top of it, right? The entire goal of Foundry is like to build your own proprietary apps that you as a company can use because it's an instance on Foundry. So one could argue they saw some value in Propeller by being able to say, okay, so this is a startup that's helping people make native mobile apps. What if we could put them into our technology stack, offer our commercial clients or governmental clients a new way to integrate the ability to make applications, even if they're not mobile apps, on top of an existing very deep and thick platform, which is Foundry. So that's like the extent of how I conceptualize why they ultimately ended up buying that company. Okay, and the last one we have, I don't really have a lot of info on. I tried to search the internet. FT Technologies. FT Technology provides retailers the ability to compete in today's omnichannel world and make their brick and mortar operations more efficient. Palantir acquired them. There's not any articles on this. It's kind of hard to figure out. The only reason I think they acquired FT Technologies is because if this is a company that's basically helping retailers have, I would argue, a data-driven view of their of their business so that they can make better investments in their business to like drive better decision making, then it probably makes more sense. You could imagine FT technology was like, okay, there's a ton of different channels you distribute to be able to drive traffic and drive sales to your company. So you're a brick and mortar operation. Here are all these different channels, and here's like a dashboard to visualize all these things. And maybe there's some type of proprietary technology that Palantir sees from a commercial perspective where they could have acquired them and be able to then offer that to their clients. And integrating it into Foundry. Maybe there was something there that they didn't have that they thought there was value in to be able to view data. All of this comes down to the synthesis and analysis and building of data to drive insights, because back in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, when Palantir made these acquisitions, that's where they saw the world was going. Even Peter Thiel told Google CEO, hey, the world is going this way, and you guys are just like resting on your laurels hoping search never goes away, which search may never go away, but Palantir had a fundamentally different understanding of where the world was going. And it seems like all these acquisitions were built on that. The reason I don't think they acquired a company post 2016 was because they finally got their commercial stuff into the hands of big clients. As I mentioned, Home Depot, American Express, Coca-Cola, even though they lost some of those deals, they were starting to gain traction. And within 4 years, they went public, right, in 2020. So 2016, they made a lot of mistakes. 2020, they went public, which means in those 3 years, I don't think they were worried about acquiring companies. They were worried about how do we build this thing to really like scale. And they ended up figuring it out. And so now they're on that journey to just continue scaling. And I don't think we're going to see any acquisitions anytime soon, because they want to take that money and really figure out how can they build something meaningful with their company and invest that $3 billion into growth versus just acquiring companies to grow. So those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. These are the 6 Palantir acquisitions that has happened in the world of Palantir. So if you didn't know them, after watching this, now you know. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. I'll see you in the next one.